Hello, thank you for the opportunity to share about mind builders and what I do. I'm hoping tonight I can give you some um, ideas and information that will help you with your students to give them a foundation that will bring them into a successful place with their learning and also just with their lives. So we launched Mind Builders in 2001. And we were primarily doing a brain training program and a reading program, which had amazing results. There are 60 sessions in the brain training section, and then there's a Master the Code reading program. But because it was so intense with the number of sessions and the reading program, we were always trying to figure out a way to make it more affordable for families and to have the same kind of results that we saw with the brain training. And 7 years ago, we were introduced to brain integration therapy, which has made a huge difference. And I will go into more detail with that as we progress. But what's happened is that we are seeing that only 20% of the students that go through brain integration need to have any further training or any further brain integration. I have listed here the topics that we're going to cover tonight. I would appreciate it if you make notes if there's something I haven't fully answered for you that we can cover later on. But I wanted to explain how we started Mind Builders, and then we're going to do some brain dances that will help you wake up your brain so you can remember what we're doing. Who needs brain integration? So the signs of struggling students and what indicates that they need brain integration. Then we'll have a breakout session with a topic to discuss, and it's about electricity. So I want you to understand that there's science behind brain integration. We'll talk about how the brain's organized and what cognitive skills are, how that is related to learning. I will explain to you the assessment that I do and what brain integration looks like, and explain the sessions. And also I want to talk about the stress that kids are experiencing right now with the COVID and online schooling and ways of addressing some of that. I also have some success stories to share with you and how to actually start with brain integration. So this is our family. Fred and I have been married for 43 years. We have 5 children and 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. And we have truly enjoyed having the opportunity to be engaged with our family and with their learning over the years. They're spread out in ages, and so we've had an opportunity to see what education has looked like over the years, and it certainly is changing all the time. We feel like the brain integration is a missing piece for helping kids to be successful. As when I started doing cognitive skills training, what I realized was that my oldest son, who had struggled in school from the time he was in kindergarten, I realized that he had cognitive skills issues, but in those days they had no idea what that was. And so it started off in kindergarten with him doing his work, and then he would throw it in the trash. And year after year, we would hear from the teachers that he was very smart, but he wasn't trying, which is really frustrating when you're trying to help them succeed and you're not getting anywhere, and trying to motivate, and that's not working either. So we didn't learn until many years later that there's such a thing as cognitive skills. And looking back, I see that that is exactly what was the problem with him. Fred would study and help him to do his math or any subject, and it would be like he'd never heard it. But what I've learned since then is that most of the people that are teaching in the educational system are people who loved school and it wasn't hard. And so it's natural for them to think that it has to do with motivation, when in reality, it has to do with not having tools that make learning easy. the good news is Tony graduated from law school and he has a very successful business. He's an entrepreneur. But when he describes his experience with school, he says he always felt like he was struggling to catch up. And it was a really negative experience for him. So we're going to go on to waking up your brain. So I hope you can see me well enough for me to show you how to do this, but you're going to, this is called the thinking cap. And putting on your ears stimulates the whole hearing mechanism in your brain and helps you remember what you hear. And you actually don't have to do it in an obvious way. You can be in a meeting and be doing this and be waking your ears up. But it helps with speech issues. It helps you with balance. It helps with your silent voice. So what you're going to do is you're going to use your thumb and your pointer, and you're going to unroll the top of your ears and go down and then down the sides and then pull on the bottom. And you're going to do that several times. And it's literally waking you up to remember and to hear what we're talking about. And the next one is called cross crawl, and this wakes up your brain for learning. And I recommend doing this. If they're doing online school, do cross crawl before they start. I don't know if you can see me, but you're going to put your right hand on your left knee, left hand on your left knee, and you're going to do that slowly several times. And you're literally waking up your brain. My daughter-in-law does this before she has tests in college. She says it makes a huge difference for her. So you're going to do that just a few times. Okay. So now your brain's woken up. So I want to share with you my experience and see if you can relate to this. But I believe that when every child goes to school, they go with enthusiasm and they want to learn. And so when a child starts saying they don't want to go to school or they don't like school, it's an indication of what their experience is. So what I want you to think about is they go to school, they're given a task to do, and they're all excited to do it because they're in school. They're working really hard and everybody else is finishing and they're not done. So they look around and it's like, what do you say to yourself? I'm going to try harder. So that's what they do. They try harder, but everybody is still getting done before they are. And this goes on several times. And before you know it, there are kids making comments or the teacher's making comments. And the question is, how long do they continue hitting their head against the wall before they give up and decide that it's them and there's something wrong with them? And the ironic thing is that we don't expect when children go to school that they're going to do sports in the same way or that they're going to do music in the same way, but we expect them to be doing education in the same way. So what we do with brain integration is we are causing the neurological pathways in the brain to be connected so that they can learn the tasks that they're doing. And we're connecting those things so that they have success. We organize the brain systems so that they are working and they're able to do their work. Let me change this. So many of the children I see are very bright, but they lack the basic wiring necessary to do the tasks that they're supposed to be doing. One of the ways that the brain is integrated is visually. And these kids can think great thoughts, but they can't express themselves, or their eyes are not working together. Their eyes are all over the place, so they're not able to read and comprehend what they're reading. So these are some of the things that are signs of visual processing difficulties. Smart people who do not like to read, skipping words or lines when they're reading. They cannot make pictures in their minds when they're reading. And car sickness is an indicator that they're also having some issues with mixed dominance. Perhaps they're right-eyed and left-handed, which means that's mixed dominance, which impacts everything working together. They're not wired together properly. The auditory problems, they can't hold on to what they hear. One of the things that happens with brain integration is that you become single-minded, your eyes are working together, and you're emotionally grounded. So these are some of the issues that happen with auditory processing problems. They have trouble following spoken directions. They have trouble alphabetizing, can't hear their own voice when they're reading, which has to do with comprehension. They can't hear themselves think. It indicates trouble with mental math. And all of these things that are listed here are issues that we see with auditory problems. That also is related to emotions and anger, emotional outbursts. And the kinesthetic has to do with them not being able to express themselves or writing their letters in a from the bottom up instead of the top down. Many times, one of the things that gets interesting in working with kids is watching for what they do that seems odd or unusual. I had a boy that watched television sideways like this because his eyes weren't working together and that was the only way he could do it. There's kids that hunch over the paper or lay their heads down on the desk because they have to see it that way so they can see. Or they're using one eye because both eyes are not working together. Or their handwriting is really tiny or really big. It's not on the lines, or the G's and the Y's are above the line. The bottom of the tail isn't below the line. One thing that I find really interesting is many of the kids, I do an assessment before they start brain integration. And one of the parts of the assessment is having them write days of the week and some other things. And I will notice if they're making their letters from the bottom up or the top down. And when I do the post assessment after they've done brain integration, many times I see that they are writing their letters the right way. And I didn't say anything to them. No one said anything. It's just that their brain is connected right and they're doing it right. So here are the discussion questions. What are some of the things your child struggles with in school? It doesn't have to be only academic. It can be relationships, physical, clumsy, difficulty expressing thoughts, having a hard time following directions. You tell them to do something, more than one thing to do, they can't remember that. And then the other question is, have you seen these difficulties in other people? So can someone take the lead for giving me a synopsis of what your group said about the questions?
So our group, basically, we talked about some of the issues that we've had is the kids focusing, like just being able to focus online. Some of the problems is just getting them to be able to stay focused online. And then another one was like some of the emotional relationships at school, just due to like regular, kid drama, like preteen stuff that goes on at school. And another one that was pretty much, I feel like the biggest thing, one of the kids in our group was dyslexic. So they had a little bit more struggles with some of the other things as far as like maybe some of the emotional as well as the being able to focus, and they're online right now. So it's harder for that specific child to be able to focus, trying to go here and there with mom and do school, and for mom to be able to focus on, with the kiddo too. So just having online class versus in class, it's a little bit harder for them to be focusing on school stuff. That was pretty much
I've
the gist of
also
it.
heard, now, are these kids having to be online all day long, or is it a period of time and then they have a break? How does it structure?
I'm not 100% sure with I'm not 100% sure. If she went into detail, I wasn't 100% sure. So was it all the time online, or was it partly, Yvonne?
It's like, well, he's mostly in person, but there's times like where when they first started, or like a cohort was maybe somebody had COVID. So right now he's online, but like, yeah, he spends a lot of the day on Zoom and online.
And is that like doing the work, or he's listening to the teacher teaching?
Well, they do Zoom and they do the work, and then they do some work on their own too.
Okay. So what were some of the others from the other group?
I'll go ahead. We were group 1. Trend seemed to be younger boys and struggling with focus, struggling with identifying letters, sight words, but not having issues identifying anything else. So the visual piece that you brought up kind of struck a chord for our group. I think I was the only one in the group that had identified issues with my daughter, and not realizing that she had some learning challenges because she was such a hardworking student, and then got a tutoring assessment done and learned what struggles and challenges she had. So felt like I was a bad parent, but so lucky to have the tools now to provide assessments for our kids that we didn't have, 20, 30 years ago,
Right.
that were utilized. And I think the important thing is for what you were talking about is keeping them focused and engaged and not dislike school. Because if they can excel in one area like math or, other areas, but the reading and the letters and not visually being able to understand that, I could see how that is a concern for the rest of our group. So
Yeah, definitely. That's good. Do you know about the age group of the kids that you're talking about, or was it a wide range of ages?
it was right between like 6 and 10. Older siblings as well, not showing signs, but right now it seemed to be the younger siblings. And group 1, if I left anybody out or anything else, please feel free to chime in.
Thank you so much. What is the next group?
I don't know what number we were, but I can go next if you want.
Okay, great.
Pretty much a lot of things that have already been said, just mainly focus has been hard for our kids being online versus in school because they have distractions that they wouldn't at school. Like specifically our cat had kittens. Every time a kitten walks into the room, the kids are like, oh, kitten.
That's a tough one.
And I'll be like, would you just get up and walk out of your desk? No, but there's not a kitten at school. So yeah, focus has been really difficult. And a few of our kids, including one of mine, has autism and ADHD. So they are ready, it's a double challenge of being online and having that already. So yeah, I think that was the main things we talked about with our group. And I did not ask the other kids' ages, but my own kids range from 9 to 16. And my 12-year-old specifically is the one who has the most problems focusing.
Boy or girl?
Boy.
Yeah, it's tough on them, really tough. So again, are they all online?
Yes. And there's pros and cons to it. They love that, like, they can go at their own pace. And my younger two specifically do not need to be on the computer much, because they'll have assignments like read this chapter and answer the questions type thing. So they like that. One of the perks is that they can get school done at their pace. So while they might finish their school at like 1:30 in the afternoon, their classmates in the school would be still sitting in desks till 3:30. So it has its pros and cons.
Right, that's a good point. And there's one more group, right?
Yes, there is.
I think we're in group 3. I'm not too positive though.
Yeah, you are. Go ahead.
So we, there was 2 of us out of the group where our children actually write from bottom to top. So we found that kind of interesting and we wanted to know more about it. It wasn't something that they consistently do, but we're curious to know like how to fix it, I guess. And every single one of us noticed that our children do have some of these qualities. They weren't all the same. My son specifically, he's in 2nd grade and he was recently diagnosed with ADD. So he doesn't retain the information. He's not like hyperactive or anything. He does pretty well in school, but he was complaining that he can learn it, but he can't remember it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So he has a really hard time like retaining the information. There was another gal, and she has, I think, 4 kids, and all of her kids had some of the traits, and hers were ranging from high school until I think elementary.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we didn't get really in depth like all the rest of the group. So
Okay. Well, focus is a big deal, and especially when they are having to do this online. I will give you some tips as we get to the end of this about what to do while they're online to help them to be more focused. One of the things with the writing, the question about writing, is that it's something that has to do with the wiring in their brain when they write like that. You can try to train it, but like I said, what I've seen is that when they are integrated and the wiring is there for their brain to work as a whole, then they just start writing it the right way. So it's amazing. I will continue on about what brain integration is. And then I would really appreciate it if, in terms of what you've discussed, if you don't feel that I covered it or addressed that, then I would really like for you to tell me so we can go further with it. So this picture of the lamp is kind of odd, but the point is it's all about electricity. And you don't look at a lamp that's not plugged in and say that it's dumb or it's stupid. You plug it in and it works. And that's the simplest way to describe what brain integration is. It's plugging in the brain so that it's organized and working as a whole rather in parts. Did you know that everything vibrates? If you've read anything about quantum physics, the universe and all that is within it is in constant state of motion. And the science of quantum physics has proven that everything has a molecular level of energy and is in a state of motion. It was not until the latter part of the 20th century that the electrical nature of the body was discovered and became a measurable scientific fact. So we also know that the body uses electricity as a part of the mechanism for growth. So the way a child's brain is integrated is by crawling. It simultaneously activates both sides of the brain. teaching them to work together. So when the baby is crawling and looking up, they're activating that visual movie screen and the visual centers of their brain. When they're crawling and looking side to side to hear what you're saying, they're activating and plugging in the auditory parts of the brain. When they're crawling and picking up things and putting them in their mouths, they're activating the hand-eye piece. There are things that interfere with integration that aren't just not crawling. It can be that there's trauma, or they've fallen and had a head injury or other injuries, difficult birth, C-section, other things. So they can be integrated perhaps when they're crawling as a baby, and then something happens later on that interferes with the integration, like surgeries. Sometimes braces will impact integration because your teeth are electrical. So like when a child has their wisdom teeth pulled, I will see many kids for tune-ups then, kids that I've integrated before. These are just kind of some tail end ideas of things that happen that interfere with the brain working properly. And I mentioned before cross dominance. So if they're right-eyed and left-handed, that can make a difference. When I was integrated, that's one of the things that I discovered was that I have what's called mixed dominance. So I am left-eyed but right-handed. So what that means is that when I was reading, my eye would switch. My right eye would go here and it would switch when I was going across the line. I never had any problems with reading, but I certainly noticed the difference when my eyes started working together. We don't change the dominant, we just get everything to work together. One of the other things that shows integration issues is not remembering what you've studied for a test. It just goes away because you're not able to retrieve it. Can't stay on task or move from one task to the other. Easily overwhelmed by a task. I see that a lot. And trouble with self-expression, either written or spoken. It's always interesting to me that when a child is done with brain integration, very often the things that parents notice that are different have to do with a lot of different things. I've heard about a boy that he never could remember what a grapefruit was. And every time that he would have it for breakfast, he would ask his mom or dad what it was called. What's this called? And then after he was integrated, he got up, his mom came that day for his session and she said he got up from the breakfast table and he said, "I'll be right back and don't anyone eat my grapefruit." And she was just shocked because he had never been able to remember what it was called. So it's the naming and remembering things too. So the brain is organized in 3 different ways. This is a picture of the lateral side-to-side integration. And the question on this one is, what is it? That's basically the description for the lateral integration. So on the right side of the brain, it's the big picture view. And it's the vision side of the brain. And it moves the big muscles, and it's the nonverbal communicator. It's the emotional side of the brain. The left is linear logic. So it's words and phonics, speech, reasoning, learning bit by bit. So it's like each thing is a slide. It perceives in bits and pieces. It's the language hemisphere. So the corpus callosum, which is down the center there, is supposed to be a bridge between both sides. if it's not, and you're stuck in one side, then you're not able to communicate. Or a big picture for me is like my oldest son who had cognitive problems. He was Mr. Messy because he couldn't see the whole picture, but he can't break it down to bit by bit to know where to start. It has to do with labeling things, making distinctions. So this is one way that the brain is organized. And another way that the brain is organized is bottom to top integration. And that question is, where is it? So this has to do with centering. So it has to do with feeling and expressing emotion. It's physical and emotional. It has to do with grounding and organization and direction. So the instinctual part of the brain is the brainstem. It's the things that are hardwired, breathing, blinking, all those kinds of things. If this is not integrated properly, your hands and eyes are not working together well with your feet and may not coordinate with your eyes, have problems with writing and self-expression. And what I see frequently is kids that have had negative experiences in school, they get stuck in this area. So they don't get to the rational side of the brain, which has to do with having a perspective on what they're doing. They're stuck in their emotions. And integration takes them out of that. It's the fight and flight response, if you've heard of that before. Sorry, I'm looking at your faces. I have a hard time remembering to look at the camera. So back to front integration has to do with focus. Has to do with context and decision-making, comprehension, higher level thinking, and it has to do with storing information, trouble with hearing and seeing, and trouble retrieving the information. So for example, the back of the brain is like a filing cabinet where all the information is. This is the person that studies for the test. And when they go to take the test, they can't remember everything that they knew before. It's just gone because they haven't been able to retrieve it. So this is the composite learning model, which is a picture of cognitive skills. Like I said, this is something that for many years they were not aware of the need for these underlying tools. So the teacher teaches, but the first step is the processing system. You have to have good processing speed, working memory, and focus. Then there's long-term memory, visual processing, auditory processing, reasoning and logic, comprehension and planning. All of these things are essential to learn quickly and efficiently. So one of the things that I've seen over the years is that there are a number of kids that will have like a super strong visual processing or auditory processing, fast processing speed. In the first few years of school, they are able to cover up the weaknesses that they have. But when they get to be fourth graders, where they're switching from learning to read to reading to learn, is where their compensations start falling apart, because the amount of reading increases, the time to do it in decreases, and it just gets further and further year after year to where it's overwhelming, and many times they give up because they think there's something wrong with them when it's really having to do with those skills that they need to have. It's always good to start with them younger, because then you're not dealing with the distracting behaviors that they developed, the oppositional behaviors that they develop, and also their negative self-talk, which is the biggest deal. So when I'm going to work with a student, one of the first things that I do is a pre-assessment. And it includes all of these things that I just showed you the pictures of. So the processing speed is how quickly can you do something. Working memory is like short-term memory. How can you remember things visually and auditorily to hold on to them to do something with the information? Visual processing is picturing and manipulating and organizing and comprehending and thinking with visual information. Word attack, you probably know what that is. It's applying the phonic codes you can pronounce unknown words. But auditory analysis is the ability to hear the sounds. It's called phonemic awareness, to hear the sounds in a word, to be able to blend and discriminate and analyze the speech sound in a spoken pattern. The word attack and the auditory analysis are key parts of being able to read, identify words, and comprehend what you're reading. Then logic and reasoning is reasoning and solving spatially defined problems, which require high-level conceptual abilities. Visual auditory is to associate and translate a series of symbols into verbal sentences. So in that assessment, they're looking at symbols and I'm telling them a word that represents that symbol, and then they have to read the sentences and retain the information about the symbols. Word identification is they are identifying and reading isolated words, so they're not in a sentence, so they can't guess what the word is. It's really how easy is it for you to decode a word. And then the passage comprehension is to comprehend short passages. So it gives us a good picture of where they are before they have the brain integration. And that's one of the things that I like, is having it in black and white so that you can see where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are. It compares them to other children their age so that they know where the comparison is. So the history of brain integration is that two medical doctors and an educator, Doman and Delgado, in the 40s and 50s, credited for developing sensory integration principles. And they started working on this because they worked in a rehabilitation hospital, and they were trying to find out how to rehabilitate people that had had trauma, brain trauma. Paul Dennison is known for laterality repatterning and brain gym. And he worked as a reading specialist, and he's the one that discovered the connection between movement and reading. He incorporated strategies from vision therapy, and he also used applied kinesiology, which is muscle checking. And then Rebecca Kennard is the one that developed brain integration almost 30 years ago. And she started experimenting with Diane Kraft and the brain gym material, and she added some other things, which are what we're doing now. And it accelerated the results by the things that she added. So what brain integration therapy looks like is you're using physical movement, and you're using neuro-linguistic eye accessing cues. And the muscle checking is a way of checking the neurological wiring. Can you see this down here where my arrow is? Is the picture working? You can see it. It's called an AccuSpark, and it's a piezoelectric, it has a piezoelectric spark from it, and that's used on acupressure points. And that is part of what has made brain integration therapy so effective and has given us the ability to do it in just a few sessions. The difference between brain integration therapy and the brain gym and other ones is that we are focusing primarily on educational issues.
My son has done the AccuSpark with his therapy before.
Has he?
Yeah,
with it, the son that has autism?
yes.
And how has that worked for him?
I think it helped him. He did it when he was doing occupational therapy, which he graduated from in the spring. So,
Well, Rebecca has worked with a number of kids with autism, and they're doing things that they weren't supposed to be able to do. It's made that much of a difference for them. And especially the social part, interacting. Let me see here. So when we're doing the physical movement, so basically the easiest way to describe brain integration therapy is that your brain's the computer, we're feeding information into the brain and giving it an objective. We're using muscle checking to check the neurological wiring to see if those things are wired together for that activity. And it's also a way of biofeedback to the brain. We're using the acutherapy to reinforce what we're doing. And then at the end of the session, they're doing cross crawl movements and other physical movement and using their eyes to activate the part of the brain that we're repatterning. And it's very effective. So this is just a recap. The brain integration session, for example, this is like the first one, is the goal is the eyes working together. So they would say, my eyes work well together when I read. And this creates an objective for the brain and the body. So when the eyes work together, both sides of the brain are engaged in the process like reading, like for me. So we muscle check this statement to see how does my brain function in relationship to the task. Then we check other areas such as the ears, if they're plugged in, hand, eye, the coordination, does my head know where my feet are? And then the best analogy is the computer one. And then we repattern for the task using movement and the eyes to enter into the computer. The repetition of each session deepens the neural integration. And with BIT, the more you do them, it lays down the neural network. So there are 10 sessions that lay the foundation. And then if there are specific things that they need to have addressed, whether it is focusing and ignoring distractions. One of my students, he was 12 years old and he could not tie his shoes. His mother's a special ed teacher. She was really frustrated because she had tried all different ways to teach him how to tie his shoes. So we made that a repatterning activity. And he ties his shoes with one session. Just done. I've done repatterning activities for a little boy who was adopted. He's from another country and he was having a great deal of difficulty buttoning a shirt. So that was a repatterning activity and it made a difference for him. So there's a wide variety of ways that you can use this. So I don't know that I need to read all of these to you, but this is PJ. And he not only did great in having the brain integration, it made a big difference for him with his academics, but it also made a difference for him with sports. His mother was integrated also, and she said it made a big difference for her with multitasking. And his sister was also integrated, and her teacher commented on how much her focusing improved. This is a student, Vanessa, who was in, she graduated, she did not graduate from high school, she dropped out. I started working with her when she was trying to get her GED. And she's a very smart girl, but she had had years of negative self-talk and disappointment. And she did an amazing job. She did the brain integration, she did PACE, and then she did the reading program. And she actually graduated from college. and really changed her attitude about persevering and being able to do the work. She was amazing. And this is another boy who has gone from F's to A's and B's. And he says it's because of the brain integration. What's interesting to me with this boy is he is excelling amazingly. But when we did the post-test after him, the post-assessment, it didn't show a dramatic change. He still showed having some weaknesses, but his whole attitude has changed, and he's got this I can do this attitude now. And this is a little girl who fell out of a grocery cart at 8 months in Costco and landed on her head and had all kinds of problems. And she is doing amazing. She did the brain integration, she did the brain training, and she did the reading program. And many members of her family and other people have done brain integration because of her. But this is her post-test after she had all of those things. So her average increase was 4.17 years. As you can see, she's 12.3 here. And she's up to age 15 in her visual processing. Working memory went up. Her visual auditory went up as high as it goes. She increased in every area. And these are just a couple of other students. The one on the left, or the 11.7-year-old male, his average increase was 2.9 years. And the other was 3 point something, I can't see it. 13.5-year-old female. And she only did the brain integration, and so did the boy. This young lady was referred by her counselor. She had been in counseling for anxiety for a couple of years, and the counselor was wanting to refer her to a psychiatrist to be medicated because she wasn't getting any better. She's had amazing improvements. The rest of her family came and had integration also. It made a big difference for them. And this young man, his mother was thrilled because she was having a boy that she could tell him more than one thing to do, and he was doing it. She came home one day after telling him to do several chores, and he was doing them, and she was elated. Had not happened before. So the results of brain integration are relaxation, easier seeing and hearing and writing and learning, and a new ease and insight to everything that you do. So it's not magic, and it's not like the only thing, but what it does is get the brain to work as a whole. It puts Velcro on your ears so you can retain what you hear. And it is the first place to start if your child is struggling. So many times when children are struggling, the first place that parents go is tutoring or doing summer school. And reteaching the same information that they did get that year is not the most effective way to help them. Because if the cognitive skills are weak, they need to be strengthened. And then you add the tutoring if they need to fill in information that they haven't retained. But what I see frequently is when everything is connected, they're able to access the information that's already there. And that's when they go from being a C student to A's and B's, because the information was there all along. They just couldn't retrieve it. I hope that makes sense. So here are a couple of things that I put in here that I felt would be very beneficial for all of you to know about, since you're having to do the online schooling. So doing a brain break after 20 minutes of being online, if you can do that, getting up and moving around is critical. There is a book called Smart Moves, and I'd be happy to send some title suggestions for ways of helping your children. If you're interested, just drop me a note on the chat or call me. But there's a book called Smart Moves that talks about learning is movement, and it's critical that they move around, which is not what's happening with the online. It's two-dimensional, nothing's going on. So getting up and moving around is very important. Doing the cross crawl, or there are some other exercises that you can do. If you look up brain gym exercises on Google, there's a lot of different ones listed there that are helpful. The other key thing is drinking a lot of water. If you can believe this, 2% drop in body water can trigger fuzzy short-term memory, trouble with basic math, and difficulty focusing on the computer screen or the printed page. It's like one of those things we all know, but don't necessarily do. So the electrical system needs the water. So that's what, and Carla Hannaford is the author of Smart Moves. So I wanted to talk about the stress the kids are experiencing, that we are experiencing because of the pandemic, that it causes the brain and body integration to shut down. It becomes difficult to think and to do at the same time. And one of the things with the focus issues has to do with the distractions. And if there's any way of eliminating distractions, that does help, like the kittens. If you're doing online learning, it's really important to do like the cross crawl, putting your thinking cap on as often as possible. But in order to think better, you have to get the move on. So we all want success for our kids. And if you want to schedule a brain integration session, you can call me. 10 sessions, including the pre and post assessment. The price for Parents Challenge is $500. And so the question is, what prevents you from getting it for your child if you think they need it? If you need help with the finances, there's help available through Parents Challenge. There's many people at Parents Challenge who have done the brain integration, and I'm sure would be happy to talk to you about their experience. So my question to you is, have I answered questions about the things that came up with the discussion group? Or is there some other things that I can address for you?
Judy, I have a question. It's Andrea. So how familiar are schools, public schools, private schools, homeschooling, about this technique to help identify with some of these learning struggles or what they may be categorizing as disabilities? Because I think that that's a big challenge.
It is a big challenge.
With the ratio of students to teachers.
Exactly.
For costs, you know, anytime a parent has to do another test or assessment to figure out what the problem is, there's always a cost associated. So what would your recommendations be? Because I can only feel for the group that I was with, and that their students had a hard time identifying letters. I don't even know the first step of what to do to help them, or if the teachers are doing anything to help with that.
That's a really good question. And one of my things that is frustrating to me is so many times people pay a lot of money for an assessment to get a label. And it's like, okay, well, you gave me a label, but what, can you give me some hope? Can you tell me what I can do to make a change? right? Because with the brain training, one of the things that we saw is that it totally makes a huge difference to get everything working. The brain has neuroplasticity, so you can make new connections in the brain. So with the brain training that we were doing, that's what we were doing, is making new connections and giving them the ability to have the skills that they needed to learn. The thing that is surprising, so backing up, when we started with Mind Builders, because the cost was more, because it's one-on-one, we started a nonprofit, and we had a federal grant called the Colorado Compassion Initiative, and it gave us the opportunity to go into a school and to work with some students that the teachers had picked, who they felt were good candidates, and they had to qualify financially too. And in meeting with the teachers, what surprised me was it was a middle school, and the assessments that we did showed these kids with everything way, way below the line. I mean, some of them even were at age 5, which is as low as it goes, and they were in middle school. And the teachers are like, how in the world could a child be in school this long and have that? But it has to do with the cognitive skills. It has the ability, it has to do with the ability to process information, to retain what you see and what you hear. It's basic. And if those things are not there, if the brain is not working as a whole, then they just are frustrated because they're not learning. And the teachers, they have too many kids. How can they possibly do this kind of a program? So we stopped with the nonprofit because the paperwork with the grant was so unbelievable that we just could not do it, add it to the work. But the brain integration to me is the missing piece. To be able to spend 10 sessions at $500 instead of in the thousands doing the other program and getting very good results. In fact, not needing anything more than, well, most people don't need the rest of the program. They don't need the brain training. So with 10 sessions, they're plugged in and they're ready to go. And the kids, like these kids that are not recognizing letters, they're not learning the basic, everything has changed in the schools, so they're always trying something new. But with the program that we're doing, you're learning the basic of, here's a code for this sound. What's the most common sound for this code? And so they're learning automaticity with that and making connections in the brain. This is in the brain training. But very often with the brain integration, all of a sudden that piece comes together because everything's working as a whole now. So does that make sense, Andrea? Does that answer your question?
I mean, definitely. I think there's other questions too that came in the chat for you.
Yes, there are.
Super
Delia
helpful.
asked if online schooling and the amount of time spent online breaks down brain integration, how often should we be getting our children in with you?
How often? I believe that if they have the 10 sessions of integration, then you have the foundation that they need. And if you are doing the things that need to be done while they're online, like the brain breaks, and also doing the brain dances, the exercises, what that is doing is strengthening the connections in the brain. So then, sometimes they need a tune-up, like if they fall or something else goes on, but most of the time, the brain integration, the 10 sessions is all they need. So just to give you an example, am I running out of time, Catherine?
No, you're good on time. There's just one more question in the chat once you're done with this.
Okay, well, so just to give you an idea, when I talked about the objectives of the brain integration sessions, so the very first one is, do my eyes work well together? The second one is, can my eyes stay on the line when I'm reading? The next one is, does my remember ear, is it plugged in? Can I remember and hear my silent voice when I'm reading? Because that has to do with comprehension. The next one has to do with construct. Your left ear is the construct ear. That is, can I put sounds together and hold them together to read? The next one's visual memory. So can I remember what I see? That has to do with spelling. It has to do with a lot of different things. The next is hand-eye, handwriting, expressing yourself. Then organization, focus, expressing, and being able to explain a process. And the last one is emotional and physical balance. So all 10 are like the foundation. And then if there's another issue, then we address that with another session.
And then the second question was, does this help with amblia? I'm not pretending like I know how to say it. Lazy eye.
It can. I've worked with some kids with that where there has been a difference and it's corrected it, but there's been other kids that had to go to have more specific things done. So it's the first place, to me, it's the first place to start, because if you go into vision therapy and some of those other things, you're talking a lot of bucks. Well, if anyone has any questions, feel free to call me. If I can help in any way, whether it's just answering questions, putting you towards some resources, I'm happy to do it. It's all about our kids succeeding. And the sooner that you address some of the issues that you're seeing with your student, the better, because a lot of times what parents hear from school is they'll grow out of it. No.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm new to the whole tutoring and assessment thing, our tutor reached out to my daughter's teachers and let them know what and what kind of practices that they were kind of teaching to build that foundation for my daughter. Do you do anything like that with the school or the teachers? Because I also have seen that conflicting, like how does, a school teach or how do they do certain things anymore? And so I'm just curious.
It depends on the school, because what I've seen with, I've had teachers call me that want to know what we're doing and how they can help the student that I'm working with. I've worked with a lot of children of parents that are teachers, and they're very open to what this is. But as far as generally speaking, no, I don't think so. I mean, I'm working with a boy right now that his mother is a special ed teacher, and she's frustrated because a lot of the services with what's happening with the virus, the services are gone for helping him with reading and so forth. So she's going outside of the system, and I see that with a lot of people. They just go outside the system because these teachers only have so much time. And like my friends that are teachers, this virus has put tremendous load on them with having to learn how to do things online and all the other pieces to that. So it's putting stress on everyone.
Also, Ms. Judy, there was another question in the chat. How does this help emotionally?
It grounds you emotionally, because I didn't even go into the vagus nerve. There's a lot of new science on the vagus nerve. It's a cranial nerve that goes from your brain into all your organs. And a lot of times it's not connected. So it's basically connects your head with your heart is the simplest way to explain it. And it emotionally grounds you, gives you calm. I work with a lot of adults that have anxiety issues, and it puts you in a place where you have perspective on how you're feeling instead of being stuck in the panic.
Also, Susan Mojo wanted to know if she could contact you via phone just to go over a little more in depth about her situation.
Yes, absolutely. Love to talk to you. Okay. Well, thank you. This has been good. I love your questions. It's so hard doing this on Zoom and not being able to see your faces. So thank you for participating. I appreciate it.